Man refuses to let black female Navy SEAL sit in first class. Then she gives him a shocking note. The plane was quiet, except for the hum of the engines. Passengers in first class were settling into their oversized seats, flipping through magazines or sipping sparkling water. Then the peace shattered. "You can't sit here," a man barked, his voice loud enough to turn heads. His suit screamed wealth, but his tone reeked of something uglier. "This is first class, not a free-for-all." Everyone's eyes shifted to the target of his outburst. A young black woman in crisp Navy fatigues. Her calm demeanor didn't match the storm brewing around her. She stood tall, shoulders squared, her Navy SEAL insignia gleaming on her chest. Her ticket in hand, she stared at him, unflinching. "I have a ticket," she said evenly. "I don't care what you have," the man spat back. "This seat isn't for people like you." The cabin crew rushed over, trying to de-escalate. The woman stepped aside, her face impassive, but her eyes betrayed something, a spark. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, and scribbled a note. Handing it to the man, she said, "Since you're so sure of yourself, read this when you have a moment." He took the note, snatched it really, and stuffed it into his pocket. He didn't bother reading it. She calmly turned and walked toward the back of the plane. The murmurs of the other passengers followed her, and the man smirked, pleased with himself. But when the plane landed and he unfolded that note, his face turned pale. Earlier that day, the woman, Lieutenant Commander Angela Hayes, had been rushing to catch her flight. She was fresh off a grueling mission and eager to get home to Virginia. Despite her exhaustion, she always carried herself with the discipline her training instilled. Angela had learned long ago how to tune out the stares that followed her whenever she wore her uniform in public. People weren't used to seeing a black woman with Navy SEAL insignia. The questions, the side glances, they didn't bother her anymore. She'd faced tougher challenges than ignorance. At the airport, she approached the check-in counter, where a clerk greeted her with a smile. "First-class ticket, ma'am." Angela nodded, handing over her military ID and ticket. She'd earned this small comfort after years of serving her country, often in dangerous conditions. The clerk processed her ticket quickly, with no sign of hesitation or doubt. "Thank you for your service," the clerk said as she handed the ticket back. Angela smiled. "Just doing my job." At security, she noticed the usual blend of admiration and skepticism. Some passengers looked impressed. Others seemed to question her legitimacy. One officer paused when he saw her ID, but quickly recovered, waving her through. Angela's thoughts drifted as she walked to her gate. She wasn't looking for trouble. All she wanted was a quiet flight home. By the time she boarded, she was tired but ready to settle into her seat. First class wasn't a luxury she often indulged in, but this trip was different. As she walked to her assigned seat, she felt a pair of eyes on her. The man in the suit was already in his seat, his laptop open, typing furiously. When he saw Angela, his fingers froze mid-keystroke. His eyes narrowed as he watched her approach. "Excuse me," she said, glancing at her ticket to double-check the seat number. The man barely glanced at her. "I think you're in the wrong place." Angela held up her ticket. "This is my seat." His tone sharpened. "Are you sure? This is first class." Angela's patience wore thin. "Yes, I'm sure. My ticket says so." The man's voice grew louder, drawing the attention of other passengers. "I don't know how you got that ticket, but you don't belong here. Go find your seat in coach." Angela didn't flinch. Years of training taught her to remain calm under pressure. She wasn't about to let this man's ignorance provoke her. The flight attendant arrived, trying to mediate. "Sir, she has a valid ticket for this seat." "Well, that's just great," the man said with a sarcastic laugh. "Next thing you know, they'll let anyone in here." Angela looked him straight in the eye. "What exactly do you mean by anyone?" He didn't answer, but the meaning was clear. Rather than argue, Angela reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook. She tore out a page and wrote a quick message. Then she handed it to him. "Read this when you're ready," she said, turning to the flight attendant. "It's fine, I'll move." The tension in the cabin lingered after Angela left. Passengers whispered, some clearly uncomfortable with what had just happened. The man looked smug, like he'd won some kind of victory. Angela took her new seat in coach without complaint, pulling out a book to pass the time. She didn't need to make a scene. The note would do the talking. As the plane soared through the clouds, the man seemed to forget about the encounter. But when they landed and he unfolded that note, he found 5 words that changed everything. The note read, "Ask about Operation Neptune Strike." He froze, his face draining of color as he read it again. And that's when it hit him. He had just insulted a war hero. The man sat frozen in his first-class seat, the small piece of paper trembling in his hands. His smirk vanished, replaced by a flush of embarrassment and something deeper, shame. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the 5 words on the note. Ask about Operation Neptune Strike. What was Neptune Strike? The phrase sounded important, monumental even, but he had no clue what it meant. His confidence faltered, and for the first time in years he felt small. Passengers filed past him as the plane taxied to the gate, each person lost in their own world. Some glanced at him with barely veiled judgment, having witnessed the earlier confrontation. He avoided their eyes, gripping the note like it was a lifeline. Angela, meanwhile, had already gathered her belongings and was making her way to the terminal. She moved with the same calm and precision she always carried, as if nothing had happened. But inside, she felt a mix of exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. She hadn't needed to say more. The note would do all the work. Hours earlier, as Angela prepared to board, she had overheard a group of young sailors at the gate, chatting about their upcoming deployments. They noticed her uniform and greeted her with respectful nods. "Ma'am," one of them said, "are you with the teams?" Angela smiled, recognizing the subtle way they were asking if she was a SEAL. It wasn't common knowledge, and she preferred it that way. "Something like that," she replied. The young man nodded, clearly impressed but too polite to pry. Angela appreciated the unspoken respect. It was a rare moment where she felt acknowledged for the sacrifices she had made without being questioned. By the time she reached the gate, she was already mentally preparing for the journey ahead. She wasn't expecting trouble, at least, not the kind that came from a man like him. Back in the terminal, Angela walked briskly toward baggage claim, eager to collect her duffel and leave. The hustle and bustle of the airport felt oddly comforting, a stark contrast to the tension on the plane. She knew the man would eventually connect the dots. The note wasn't cryptic if you knew where to look. Operation Neptune Strike wasn't just a name, it was a legacy. It was the kind of mission that made headlines but left out the real details. Angela had been part of the team that executed it. A high-risk, high-stakes operation involving the rescue of American hostages from a hostile foreign country. It was a mission that had required precision, courage, and a level of skill that few could claim. Angela wasn't one to brag, but she knew the importance of her role. She had saved lives, and now that man, so quick to judge her by her appearance, was holding a clue to her story in his hands. As the man disembarked the plane, his mind buzzed with questions. He was a man of means, used to getting what he wanted without resistance. The idea that someone like Angela, a black woman, a soldier, a stranger, could unsettle him so completely was foreign. He pulled out his phone as he walked toward the terminal. A quick search for Operation Neptune Strike brought up headlines that made his stomach drop. Daring rescue mission saves 12 hostages in hostile territory. Navy SEAL team leader commended for heroism. Breaking barriers, the first black female SEAL. Her face stared back at him from one of the articles. Angela Hayes, the very woman he had dismissed as unworthy of sitting next to him. Angela had just reached the carousel when she heard someone calling her name. She turned to see the man from the plane, his face pale and anxious. He was pushing past other passengers, his expensive carry-on and towel clutching the note like a lifeline. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes." He called out, his voice cracking slightly. Angela sighed. She had hoped the note would make him reflect quietly, not chase her down in an airport. Still, she stood her ground, watching as he approached. When he reached her, he was out of breath. I didn't know," he stammered. "I had no idea who you were." "You didn't need to know," Angela replied coolly. "Respect isn't something people should have to earn based on their titles or accomplishments. It should come automatically." The man flinched at her words, but she wasn't done. "You judged me because of how I look. Because I didn't fit your idea of who belongs in first class," she continued. "Do you realize how often people like me deal with that? And I'm not just talking about the military. This is every day." "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I mean it." Angela held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it. Apologies are easy. Change is harder." The man fell silent, his gaze dropping to the floor. For a moment, the two of them stood there in the crowded baggage claim, an island of tension in the sea of movement. Angela could see that her words had landed, but she wasn't interested in making him feel better. That wasn't the point. Her bag appeared on the carousel, and she grabbed it, slinging it over her shoulder. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving the man standing alone, the note still crumpled in his hand. The encounter left the man shaken. He returned to his hotel that evening and sat on the bed, staring at the note and the articles he had pulled up on his phone. The more he read about Angela's career, the more ashamed he felt. She had completed some of the most dangerous missions imaginable. She had endured training that broke most men. And she had done it all while breaking barriers he hadn't even realized existed. He thought about her words. Change is harder. Something inside him shifted. He didn't know how or when, but he resolved to make that change. As Angela walked out of the airport and into the crisp night air, she felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. She didn't know if the man would truly reflect on what had happened, but she had done her part. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister. "Can't wait to see you. Dinner's on me." Angela smiled, tucking the phone into her pocket. Whatever happened next, she was ready for it. But this wasn't over, not yet. Because as much as she wanted to move on, the events of that flight would soon ripple out in ways neither of them could predict. The man sat at his hotel desk, laptop open, fingers hovering above the keys. He had spent the last few hours researching Angela Hayes, and what he found had shaken him to his core. He reread the articles, his eyes lingering on every mention of her achievements. The headline that struck him the hardest was an in-depth profile. The Navy SEAL who changed history. The article detailed Angela's rise through the ranks, from her early days in the Navy to becoming the first black female Navy SEAL. It highlighted the challenges she had faced, not just the grueling physical training, but the isolation of being a trailblazer in a predominantly male, predominantly white field. Her peers had doubted her. Her superiors had questioned her, but she had proved them all wrong. Operation Neptune Strike was just one of many missions she had led. According to the article, Angela's team had infiltrated hostile territory to rescue a group of American journalists who had been taken hostage. The mission had been a success, but not without cost. Angela herself had been injured, but she had refused evacuation until every hostage and team member was safe. The man leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed. He felt the weight of his earlier actions pressing down on him. He had dismissed her, insulted her, and yet she had shown more dignity in their brief encounter than he had in years. For the first time in his life, he questioned himself deeply. His wealth, his privilege, it had all insulated him from the realities others faced. He had always considered himself a good person, but now he wasn't so sure. Angela was finally home, settling into the quiet comfort of her sister's house. The smell of homemade chili filled the air, and her niece, a bright-eyed 7-year-old named Layla, ran to greet her. "Auntie Angie." Layla squealed, throwing her arms around Angela. Angela scooped her up, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Hey, kiddo, did you miss me?" "Of course," Layla said with a toothy grin. "Mom says you're a hero." Angela laughed softly, setting Layla down. "Mom says a lot of things." Her sister, Monica, appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Only the truth," Monica said with a smile. "Come on, dinner's almost ready." As they sat around the table, the warmth of family helped Angela shake off the events of the day. She didn't mention the man from the plane. It didn't seem worth it. For now, she just wanted to enjoy the simple things. A home-cooked meal, the laughter of her niece, the presence of her sister. But as the night wore on, her mind kept drifting back to the note she had given him. She wondered if he had read it, if he had understood what it meant. Would it make a difference? Or would he forget about her as soon as the plane landed? The man couldn't sleep. The hotel room was quiet, but his mind was loud. He kept replaying their encounter, her words echoing in his head. Respect isn't something people should have to earn. He opened his laptop again, this time searching for more than just news articles. He wanted to understand. He began reading about the history of racial discrimination in the military, the challenges women faced in combat roles, and the systemic barriers that people like Angela had to overcome. Each story was a revelation, chipping away at the ignorance he hadn't even realized he carried. By the time the sun rose, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to let this end here. Angela's phone buzzed the next morning with an unexpected email. The subject line read, "From the man on the plane." Her first instinct was to delete it, but curiosity got the better of her. She opened the email, her eyes scanning the words quickly. "Dear Lieutenant Commander Hayes, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to say something. I was wrong. About everything. About you. About how I acted. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that you've changed the way I see the world. I'm sorry for the disrespect I showed you, and I promise to do better. If there's anything I can do to support you or others like you, please let me know. I mean it." Angela stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to move on with her life. But another part of her, a small but persistent part, wondered if this was an opportunity to make an impact. She closed the email without responding, deciding to let it sit for a while. Later that day, Monica noticed Angela's distracted expression. "What's going on?" Monica asked, pouring them both a cup of coffee. Angela hesitated before explaining the incident on the plane and the email that followed. Monica frowned. "Do you think he's sincere?" "I don't know," Angela admitted. "People can say a lot of things when they feel guilty. It doesn't mean they'll follow through." Monica nodded thoughtfully. "But what if he does mean it? What if this is his wake-up call?" Angela sighed. "Maybe. But I'm not responsible for fixing him. That's his job." That evening, Angela decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would help clear her head. As she strolled through her neighborhood, she noticed a local park where kids were playing basketball. She smiled, watching their carefree energy. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes." "Yes, who's this?" "This is Sarah Collins from the Washington Post. We've received multiple inquiries about an incident involving you on a recent flight. I'd like to discuss your side of the story." Angela stopped in her tracks. "How did you get my number?" "The airline confirmed your identity. A passenger reported the altercation, and it's gaining traction online. Would you be willing to comment?" Angela's pulse quickened. She hadn't expected this to become public. "I'm not interested," she said firmly, ending the call. But as she walked back home, she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. She had tried to let it go, but now it seemed the world wasn't ready to do the same. And somewhere she knew the man on the plane was about to face a storm he couldn't ignore. The storm hit harder and faster than Angela had anticipated. By the next morning, her name was trending on social media. Headlines ranged from accurate to wildly exaggerated. Navy SEAL confronts racism on first-class flight. Trailblazing SEAL faces discrimination in the skies. Heroic Black Navy SEAL denied her seat by wealthy passenger. Angela stared at her phone, her coffee growing cold in her hand. A friend had texted her a link to one of the articles, followed by a simple message. "Is this you?" Monica peeked over Angela's shoulder and groaned. Of course, the media ran with it. Are they even getting the story right? Angela scrolled through the article, which recounted the incident in vivid detail. It quoted an anonymous passenger who described the confrontation and even included speculation about the note she had given the man. Her sister tapped her shoulder. "So, what's the plan? Are you going to say something, or just let it play out?" Angela sighed. "I don't know yet. I don't want this to become a spectacle." "You know it's already a spectacle," Monica pointed out. "The real question is whether you want to control the narrative or let someone else do it for you." Angela nodded, setting her phone down. She wasn't the type to seek attention, but she also knew the importance of standing up for herself and for others who couldn't. Meanwhile, the man from the plane, Jonathan Carter, was feeling the full weight of the backlash. He hadn't anticipated that the incident would go public, let alone turn into a national conversation. His name wasn't in the headlines, but that didn't stop his colleagues and acquaintances from piecing things together. His phone buzzed relentlessly with messages, ranging from polite inquiries to outright condemnation. "Was that you on the plane? What were you thinking? I just read about the Navy SEAL. Tell me you weren't the guy who did that. Unbelievable. This is going to hurt your reputation." Jonathan groaned, running a hand through his hair. His inbox was full of angry emails, and even his assistant had started avoiding him. He knew he had to do something, but he wasn't sure what. He considered issuing a public apology but hesitated. Would it seem genuine or would it just make things worse? Then he remembered Angela's words, "Change is harder." He realized an apology wouldn't be enough. He needed to prove that he was serious about changing, not just for her but for himself. That evening, Angela received another call, this time from the Navy's Public Affairs Office. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, this is Captain Briggs. I'd assume you've seen the news." "Yes, sir," Angela replied, already bracing herself. "The Navy is monitoring the situation closely," Briggs said. "We've been contacted by several media outlets requesting a statement. Do you plan to speak publicly about this?" Angela hesitated. "I haven't decided yet." "Well, if you do, we'd appreciate a heads up," Briggs said. "You're a decorated officer, and the Navy stands behind you. Just remember that anything you say will reflect on the service as a whole." "Understood, sir," Angela said. After hanging up, she felt a pang of frustration. Even in this situation, she had to think about how her actions might affect others. It was exhausting. The next day, Jonathan took his first step toward making amends. He reached out to a prominent civil rights organization, offering a sizable donation and volunteering to attend their upcoming workshops on racial equity and bias. When he met with the organization's director, a no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Thomas, she didn't mince words. "So you're the guy who insulted a Navy SEAL on a plane?" Evelyn asked, her tone sharp. Jonathan winced. "Yes, that's me. And I regret it deeply." "I'm sure you do," Evelyn said. "But this isn't about easing your guilt. If you're here to check a box, you can turn around and leave." Jonathan straightened in his chair. "I'm not here to check a box. I want to understand what I did wrong and how to do better." Evelyn studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good, because understanding is just the beginning. Change takes work." As the media frenzy continued, Angela decided to break her silence. She scheduled an interview with a respected journalist, someone she trusted to tell the story without sensationalizing it. Sitting in the quiet studio, Angela felt a mix of nerves and determination. The journalist, a middle-aged woman named Diane Brooks, began the interview with a gentle tone. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, thank you for joining us. Can you walk us through what happened on that flight?" Angela recounted the incident, choosing her words carefully. She didn't name Jonathan or dwell on his behavior, focusing instead on the larger issues of respect and representation. "This isn't just about me," Angela said. "It's about the assumptions people make when they see someone who doesn't fit their expectations. It's about the barriers we still need to break down, not just in the military, but in society as a whole." Diane nodded. "And what would you say to those who look up to you, especially young women and people of color?" Angela's voice softened. "I tell them that they belong. No matter where they come from, no matter what others might say, They have a right to be where they are, and I tell them to keep pushing forward even when it feels impossible. The interview aired that evening, and the response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded Angela's inbox, and the story took on a new life, not as a tale of conflict, but as one of resilience and hope. Jonathan watched the interview from his office, his chest tightening as he listened to Angela's words. Her grace and poise made his earlier actions feel even more shameful. He picked up his phone and drafted another email to her, this time keeping it brief. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, I saw your interview. Thank you for your words and for your patience. I promise to honor your message by doing the work to change, not just for myself, but for those I've wronged. I hope one day I can prove it to you. Jonathan Carter. This time, Angela responded with a single sentence. Change is a process, not a promise. Jonathan read the reply and nodded. He was ready to begin. But neither of them could have predicted what would come next, a twist that would force their paths to cross again in a way neither could have imagined. Angela thought the situation had finally settled down. The media coverage was fading, her inbox had quieted, and she was ready to focus on her work. But life had other plans. 2 weeks after the flight, Angela was at a Navy base in Virginia, preparing for an upcoming training exercise. She was going over mission plans when her commanding officer, Captain Briggs, called her into his office. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, Briggs said, gesturing for her to sit. We've received an unusual request. I wanted to discuss it with you personally. Angela furrowed her brow, curious. What kind of request, sir? Briggs leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. A civilian organization has asked for you to participate in a leadership panel they're hosting. The theme is diversity and resilience. It's an opportunity to share your experiences as a Navy SEAL. Angela hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her favorite activity, especially when it involved her personal life. What's the organization? It's called Pathways to Progress, Briggs said. Their goal is to foster conversations about equity and leadership in various fields, including the military. Angela's curiosity grew. She had heard of the organization, they were well respected, and had a history of meaningful impact. Why me? She asked. They believe your story could inspire others, Briggs said. But I'll leave the decision up to you. If you're not interested, I'll let them know. Angela nodded slowly. I'll think about it, sir. That evening, Angela received another email, this time from Evelyn Thomas, the director of Pathways to Progress. Dear Lieutenant Commander Hayes, we are honored to invite you to our upcoming panel on diversity and resilience in leadership. Your experiences, both as a Navy SEAL and as a trailblazer, would provide invaluable insight to our audience. One of our panelists, Jonathan Carter, has specifically requested your participation. He credits you with inspiring his personal journey of self-reflection and growth, which he plans to discuss during the event. We hope you will consider joining us for this important conversation. Sincerely, Evelyn Thomas, Director, Pathways to Progress ****. Angela stared at the email, her jaw tightening. Jonathan Carter. She hadn't expected to hear his name again, let alone in this context. She felt conflicted. On one hand, the event seemed like an opportunity to highlight important issues. On the other hand, she wasn't sure if she was ready or willing to share a stage with the man who had dismissed her so easily. A week later, Angela found herself at the event, dressed in her Navy uniform. The panel was held in a sleek conference room filled with rows of chairs and a diverse audience. Attendees ranged from young professionals to military veterans, all eager to hear from the speakers. Angela scanned the room, her eyes landing on Jonathan Carter, who stood near the podium. He looked different, less smug, more subdued. His usual polished demeanor was still there, but there was a noticeable humility in the way he carried himself. Evelyn greeted Angela warmly. Thank you for coming, Lieutenant Commander. It means a lot to have you here. Angela nodded politely. I'm here for the conversation, not for him. Evelyn smiled knowingly. Understood. The panel began with introductions, each speaker sharing a brief overview of their background. When it was Angela's turn, she kept it concise, focusing on her military service and the importance of perseverance. Then it was Jonathan's turn. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I used to think I understood leadership," Jonathan began. "I run a successful company, and I've always considered myself a fair and reasonable person. But a few weeks ago, I realized how blind I was to my own biases." He glanced briefly at Angela before continuing. "On a flight, I judged someone who has accomplished far more than I ever could, based solely on my assumptions. That person is Lieutenant Commander Angela Hayes." The audience turned to look at Angela, who remained stoic, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Jonathan continued, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "That experience was a wake-up call for me. It made me realize how much I still have to learn, not just about leadership, but about respect and equity. I've spent the last few weeks reflecting and working to educate myself. And I know that work is far from over." He paused, then said, "I owe her an apology, not just for that moment, but for all the moments like it that people face every day." The room was silent for a beat before Evelyn spoke. "Thank you, Jonathan. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, would you like to respond?" Angela stood, her gaze steady as she addressed the audience. "Apologies are important," she said. "But what matters more is action. Words are easy. Change is hard." She turned to Jonathan. "I hope you mean what you say, because the world doesn't need more empty promises. It needs people willing to do the work." The audience erupted into applause, and Angela sat back down, her heart racing. After the panel, Jonathan approached Angela. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," he began, his voice earnest, "thank you for giving me the chance to speak today. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know how much I respect you." Angela met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Respect is a good start. Keep working on it." Jonathan nodded, sensing that this was as much of a resolution as he was going to get. As Angela left the event, she felt a mix of emotions, pride, frustration, and a sliver of hope. The encounter had been draining, but she couldn't deny that it had sparked an important conversation. What she didn't know was that this event was just the beginning. Forces were already in motion that would intertwine their lives again, in ways neither of them could have predicted. Angela thought the panel would be the last time her path crossed with Jonathan Carter. She had said her piece, done her duty to the conversation, and moved on, or so she thought. But life had other plans, and they often came when least expected. 2 months later, Angela was deep into her training schedule, preparing her unit for an upcoming deployment. The days were long and physically demanding, which suited her. She preferred the clarity of action over the murkiness of reflection. After a grueling day, she was walking to her car when her phone buzzed with a call from Captain Briggs. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, we've been contacted by a civilian organization requesting a joint initiative with the Navy," Briggs said. Angela frowned. "A joint initiative, sir?" "They want to launch a mentorship program for young leaders," Briggs explained. "Specifically, they're looking to pair military personnel with civilians from diverse backgrounds to foster cross-industry collaboration and understanding. They've asked for you to be one of the lead mentors." Angela exhaled. "Who's behind this initiative?" "Pathways to Progress," Briggs said. Angela's grip on the phone tightened. She immediately thought of Jonathan and the panel. Did they mention who the civilian lead is? There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Jonathan Carter," Briggs admitted. "I understand if you're hesitant, but the program has the potential to make a real impact. Think about it, Hayes. You'd be mentoring the next generation of leaders." Angela's jaw clenched. She respected the idea of mentorship, but the thought of working alongside Jonathan again left her uneasy. Still, she didn't give an immediate answer. "I'll think about it, sir." That night, Angela sat on her couch, staring at the email outlining the mentorship program. She wanted to ignore it, to focus on her duties and leave this chapter behind. But as she reread the proposal, something struck her. The program wasn't about Jonathan or her. It was about the young people who could benefit from their experiences. Angela remembered her own journey and the mentors who had guided her when she felt lost. She owed it to them, and to herself, to pay it forward. With a deep breath, she replied to the email, "I'm in." The first meeting for the mentorship program was held in Washington, D.C., in a sleek conference center filled with bright-eyed young leaders. Angela arrived in uniform, her presence commanding respect the moment she stepped into the room. Jonathan was already there, standing near a table laden with name tags and program materials. When he saw Angela, he approached cautiously. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for agreeing to be part of this." Angela shook his hand firmly. "I'm here for the mentees. Let's keep the focus where it belongs." Jonathan nodded. Agreed. The mentorship program kicked off with workshops and team-building exercises. Angela was assigned to a group of 5 mentees, each from a different background. There was Carlos, a first-generation college student aspiring to become a lawyer; Priya, a tech entrepreneur; Jordan, a firefighter; Leah, a community organizer; and Malik, a high school senior dreaming of joining the military. Angela quickly established herself as a no-nonsense mentor, pushing her group to think critically and act decisively. She challenged them to confront their biases and question their assumptions, just as she had learned to do during her training. Jonathan, meanwhile, was paired with another group. Angela kept her interactions with him professional but distant, focusing on her mentees. As the program progressed, Angela began to see its potential. Her mentees were eager to learn, and she was proud of the progress they made. But her work wasn't without its challenges. One evening, after a particularly intense workshop, Malik approached Angela, his expression troubled. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course," Angela replied. Malik hesitated, then said, "How do you deal with people who doubt you because of where you come from? I feel like no matter what I do, people don't take me seriously." Angela looked at him, recognizing the frustration in his eyes. "It's not easy," she said. "But you have to believe in yourself first. People will always have opinions, but their opinions don't define your worth. Prove them wrong, not for their sake, but for yours." Malik nodded, her words resonating deeply. Meanwhile, Jonathan found himself in unfamiliar territory. Working with the mentees forced him to confront his own shortcomings as a leader. He realized that his experiences, while valuable, had often been shaped by privilege. During a mentorship roundtable, Jonathan shared a story about a mistake he had made early in his career. "I was too focused on being right," he admitted. "I thought leadership was about having all the answers, but real leadership is about listening and learning." Angela, sitting across the room, watched as Jonathan spoke. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of authenticity in him. The program culminated in a joint project where the mentees had to collaborate on a community initiative. Angela and Jonathan were assigned to oversee the project, forcing them to work together more closely than either had anticipated. Their mentees proposed creating a mentorship network for underrepresented youth, inspired by their own experiences in the program. Angela and Jonathan guided them through the process, helping them refine their ideas and secure funding. Through their collaboration, Angela noticed a change in Jonathan. He was more open, more willing to listen, and less defensive. She still kept her guard up, but she couldn't deny that he was making an effort. On the final day of the program, the mentees presented their project to a packed audience. Angela felt a surge of pride as she watched them speak with confidence and passion. After the presentation, Jonathan approached Angela. "I know I've said this before," he began, "but I want to thank you. Not just for the plane incident, but for everything since. You've shown me what leadership really looks like." Angela studied him for a moment, then said, "You're starting to get it, Carter. Just remember, it's a process." Jonathan nodded. "I won't forget." As the event wrapped up, Angela felt a sense of closure. The mentorship program had been more rewarding than she'd anticipated, and while her opinion of Jonathan had softened, she knew their paths might diverge again. But just as she was preparing to leave, Evelyn Thomas approached her with a serious expression. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," Evelyn said, "there's something you need to know. One of our mentees has uncovered a problem, and it's bigger than we thought." Can you stay for a while? Angela's instincts kicked in. What kind of problem? Evelyn hesitated. It's connected to the funding for the program. There might be corruption involved, and it could implicate some powerful people. Angela straightened, her mind racing. This wasn't over, and not by a long shot. Angela stared at Evelyn, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. Corruption? What exactly are we talking about here? Evelyn glanced around the now empty conference room, lowering her voice. One of our mentees, Priya, noticed irregularities in the funding records while working on the mentorship network's budget. She brought it to my attention this morning. The numbers don't add up. Angela's military instincts kicked in immediately. She had dealt with situations like this before: hidden threats, tangled lies, and the need to uncover the truth. Have you reported this to anyone? Not yet, Evelyn admitted. I didn't want to raise alarm until I understood the full picture. But Priya's findings suggest someone's been diverting funds from this program into private accounts. Angela nodded, her mind already working for next steps. Where's Priya now? In one of the side offices, Evelyn said. She's pulling more records. I thought you'd want to see them. Let's go, Angela said, grabbing her notebook from the table. In the office, Priya sat hunched over a laptop, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. She looked up when Evelyn and Angela entered, relief flashing across her face. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, Priya said, standing nervously. I didn't know who else to tell. Angela gave her a reassuring nod. You did the right thing. Show me what you found. Priya turned the laptop toward Angela, pointing to a spreadsheet. These are the program's official financial records. Everything looks fine on the surface, but when I cross-reference them with the deposits made to the Mentorship Network's account, I found discrepancies, thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Angela leaned in, scanning the data. Priya clicked through several tabs, revealing patterns that were impossible to ignore. Payments marked as expenses had been rerouted to an anonymous offshore account. Angela frowned. Do you have any idea who's behind this? Priya hesitated, then opened another document. The account is linked to someone listed as a consultant for the program. But here's the thing, they don't exist. Their name doesn't appear anywhere else in the organization's records. Angela's jaw tightened. We need to verify this, and fast. If someone's siphoning funds, they could be connected to people who don't want us digging. Evelyn nodded. What do you suggest? Angela straightened, her voice firm. First, we secure these records. Priya, back everything up on an external drive and make a copy for Evelyn. Second, we need to contact someone who can investigate further, quietly. Do you have a lawyer or someone you trust, Evelyn? Evelyn nodded. I'll call our legal advisor. He's discreet. Good, Angela said. I'll stay here until we've got everything backed up. Hours later, with the data secured, Angela finally left the conference center. The night air was crisp, but her mind was anything but clear. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed. She checked the screen and saw a text from Jonathan. Heard there's something going on. Need backup? Angela hesitated. She wasn't sure how Jonathan had gotten wind of the situation, but she also knew that for all his flaws, he was resourceful. And if the corruption ran as deep as she suspected, they might need all the help they could get. She typed a quick reply. Meet me tomorrow. This is bigger than we thought. The next morning, Angela and Jonathan met at a quiet cafe near the conference center. She laid out everything Priya had uncovered, her tone serious. Jonathan listened intently, his expression darkening as she explained the missing funds and the fake consultant. Do you think it's someone inside Pathways to Progress? Jonathan asked. It's possible, Angela said. But whoever it is, they've gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. This isn't a one-person operation. Jonathan nodded. What's the next move? First, we need to trace the offshore account, Angela said. That means bringing in someone with the skills to crack this open. Do you know anyone? Jonathan smirked faintly. I might. Let me make a call. By afternoon, Jonathan had connected Angela with a night specialist named Marcus, a former cybersecurity expert turned private investigator. They met at Jonathan's office, where Marcus set up a secure workstation. This isn't going to be easy, Marcus warned as he scanned the financial data Priya had uncovered. Whoever set this up knows what they're doing, but I'll find a way. Angela watched as Marcus worked, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into dangerous territory. Hours later, Marcus leaned back, rubbing his temples. I've got something. The offshore account is linked to a shell corporation. And here's the kicker. One of the listed directors is a major donor to Pathways to Progress. Evelyn, who had joined them midway through, looked stunned. A donor? Are you sure? Positive, Marcus said. This donor isn't just funding the program. They're bleeding it dry. Angela's stomach sank. They were no longer dealing with just financial misconduct. This was a web of deceit that could destroy the program and harm the people it was meant to help. We need evidence, Angela said. Something irrefutable. Marcus nodded. I'll keep digging. But if this donor has connections, they'll catch wind of us soon. Angela turned to Jonathan. Are you ready for what's coming? This could get messy. Jonathan met her gaze, his expression steady. Messy is fine. Let's do what needs to be done. That night, Angela sat alone in her apartment, reviewing everything they had uncovered. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. This wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about protecting the integrity of a program that had the potential to change lives. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Priya. I think someone's following me. Angela's heart stopped. She immediately called Priya. Where are you? Angela demanded. I'm at my apartment, Priya said, her voice trembling. I noticed a car parked outside that I haven't seen before. It's been there for hours. Lock your doors and stay inside, Angela said firmly. I'm on my way. As she grabbed her keys and headed out the door, Angela knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just a financial investigation. Someone didn't want them to uncover the truth, and they were willing to intimidate, or worse, to keep it buried. Angela arrived at Priya's apartment in less than 20 minutes, her heart pounding as she parked her car and scanned the street. A dark sedan idled across from the building, its headlights off. Angela's military training kicked in as she noted its make and model, the slightly tinted windows, and the faint outline of someone in the driver's seat. She dialed Priya's number. I'm here, Angela said. Don't open the door for anyone except me. Stay calm. Okay, Priya whispered. The car's still out there. I see it, Angela replied. Just sit tight. Angela walked up to the sedan, keeping her movements casual but deliberate. As she approached, the driver's window rolled down slightly, revealing a man in his late 30s wearing sunglasses despite the dim light. Can I help you? Angela asked, her tone firm. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave her a slow once-over before saying, Just waiting for someone. Angela crossed her arms, her eyes locked on his. Funny. You've been waiting for hours. Who are you here for? The man smirked but didn't respond. Angela leaned closer, lowering her voice. I'd think very carefully about your next move. I'm a Navy SEAL, and I have no problem calling the police to report a suspicious vehicle. Want to explain why you're parked outside my friend's apartment? The smirk faded. Without a word, the man started the car and drove off. Angela stood in the street, watching him disappear into the night. Angela went inside and found Priya pacing near the window, her laptop and documents spread across the table. It's okay, Angela said, locking the door behind her. He's gone. For now. Priya sank into a chair, her face pale. Do you think he'll come back? Angela sat across from her. Probably not tonight, but we need to assume this isn't over. Whoever's behind this knows we're digging. Priya nodded, visibly shaken but resolute. I'm not giving up. If they think they can scare me into silence, they're wrong. Angela placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Good, but we need to be smart. First, you're staying at a hotel tonight, somewhere safe. I'll help you pack. An hour later, Angela escorted Priya to a nearby hotel and checked her in under an alias. Once Priya was settled, Angela called Jonathan. "We've got a problem," Angela said, recounting the night's events. Jonathan cursed under his breath. "They're escalating. That means we're close to something big." "Exactly," Angela said. "We need to move fast. Marcus needs to keep digging, and Evelyn should start preparing for this to go public. If we're being watched, we need to control the narrative before they can spin it." "I'll call Marcus," Jonathan said. "And Angela, be careful." Angela hung up, her focus sharpening. She wasn't about to let fear derail their investigation. The next day, Marcus called with an update. "I traced the Shell Corporation's transactions further," Marcus said. "It's worse than we thought. The diverted funds are tied to political contributions, bribes, and even luxury real estate purchases. This isn't just about pathways to progress. This donor is part of a larger network of corruption." Angela's stomach sank. "Do you have names?" "Not yet," Marcus said, "but I'm close. Give me a little more time." Angela nodded. "Time is a luxury we don't have, Marcus. Be quick and careful." That evening, Evelyn called an emergency meeting with Angela and Jonathan at her office. "This is bigger than any of us imagined," Evelyn said, pacing the room. "If we expose this, it could take down some very powerful people." "That's exactly why we have to do it," Angela said. "The people funding programs like this one shouldn't be allowed to exploit them for personal gain." Jonathan leaned forward. "We need to think strategically. If we're going to blow this open, we need evidence that's ironclad. Otherwise, they'll bury us in lawsuits." Angela nodded. "Marcus is close to getting the names. Once we have those, we can bring in law enforcement." Evelyn hesitated. "What if law enforcement is compromised? What if these people have connections that go higher than we realize?" Angela met her gaze. "Then we'll find someone we can trust. We don't back down." That night, as Angela returned home, she noticed a car parked near her driveway. Her senses went on high alert as she approached, but when she got closer, the driver rolled down the window. It was Marcus. "What are you doing here?" Angela asked, surprised. Marcus looked around nervously. "I found something, and I didn't want to send it over the phone." Angela's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Marcus handed her a USB drive. "It's everything. The names, the transactions, the connections. But there's one name that stood out." Angela took the drive, her grip tightening. "Who?" Marcus hesitated, then said, "One of the people tied to this network is a high-ranking military officer, someone close to your chain of command." Angela felt a chill run down her spine. She stared at Marcus, her mind racing. "Are you sure?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Positive. Be careful, Angela. If this gets out, they'll come for you next." As Marcus drove off, Angela stood in her driveway, the weight of the revelation sinking in. This wasn't just about corruption anymore. This was personal. Angela didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the USB drive Marcus had handed her. The weight of his warning lingered in her mind. A high-ranking military officer involved in a corruption network. It was unthinkable. Yet she knew Marcus wouldn't have brought this to her unless he was certain. After a long breath, Angela inserted the drive into her laptop. Files populated the screen, meticulously organized. She began to sift through the data: bank transfers, property deeds, emails, and donor lists. Her stomach churned as she recognized one of the names: Rear Admiral Robert Whittaker, a respected figure in the Navy and someone she had met several times. Whittaker was known for his charisma and leadership. He was often the face of public initiatives to modernize the Navy and expand its diversity programs. To see his name tied to shell corporations and suspicious payments was like a punch to the gut. Angela leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. If this information were true, it would shake the Navy to its core. But if she went public without airtight proof, the backlash could destroy her career and the integrity of their investigation. The next morning, Angela called Evelyn and Jonathan for an emergency meeting. They gathered at Evelyn's office, the tension palpable. Angela wasted no time. Marcus found a name: Rear Admiral Robert Whittaker. Evelyn's eyes widened. Whittaker, are you sure? Angela nodded, sliding her laptop across the table to show them the files. The evidence connects him to multiple shell corporations funneling money out of programs like Pathways to Progress. He's not just a donor. He's one of the architects of this entire operation. Jonathan looked at the screen, his expression darkening. If Whittaker's involved, this goes deeper than we thought. He has influence not just in the military, but in government circles. Taking him down won't be easy. Angela crossed her arms. We're not backing down. But we need to approach this carefully. If we make a wrong move, he'll bury us. Evelyn nodded. Agreed. But how do we proceed without tipping him off? Angela thought for a moment. We need to build a coalition, people we can trust, both inside and outside the Navy. Once we have enough allies, we can bring this to someone with the authority to act, like the Inspector General. Jonathan frowned. And if Whittaker finds out before we're ready? Angela's jaw tightened. Then we deal with it. Head on. That evening, Angela met with Marcus to discuss the next steps. You've done incredible work, Angela said, handing him a folder of additional documents to review. But we need to go deeper. Whittaker isn't acting alone. There are other players, and we need to identify every single one of them. Marcus nodded. I'm on it. But be careful, Angela. Whittaker's not the kind of man to sit quietly if he feels threatened. He'll fight back. Angela smirked faintly. Let him. I've faced worse. The next day, Angela received an unexpected call from Rear Admiral Whittaker himself. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, Whittaker said, his voice warm and affable. I wanted to commend you on the work you've been doing with the mentorship program. It's been a great success. Angela's grip on the phone tightened. Thank you, sir. It's been an honor to be part of it. I'd like to meet with you, Whittaker continued. There's a new initiative I'm spearheading, and I believe your input would be invaluable. Are you available tomorrow? Angela hesitated. Was this a coincidence, or had Whittaker caught wind of her investigation? Of course, sir, Angela said, keeping her tone neutral. What time? 900 at my office, Whittaker replied. I'll see you then. As Angela hung up, her mind raced. She couldn't afford to show her hand, but this meeting could be an opportunity to gather intel. The next morning, Angela arrived at Whittaker's office, her uniform crisp and her expression calm. Whittaker greeted her with a smile, his demeanor as polished as ever. Lieutenant Commander, please have a seat, he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Angela sat, her eyes scanning the room for any clues. Whittaker's office was immaculate, with awards and photos lining the walls. It projected power and trustworthiness, but Angela saw it differently now. Whittaker leaned forward, his hands clasped. I've been following your career, Hayes. You've accomplished a great deal, and I believe you have the potential to go even further. Thank you, sir, Angela replied, her tone measured. I want to bring you into a new initiative focused on enhancing public-private partnerships, Whittaker said. Programs like Pathways to Progress have shown the power of collaboration. With your leadership, I believe we can take this to the next level. Angela nodded, hiding her unease. That sounds promising. What would my role be? Whittaker smiled. I'll send you the details, but let me be clear, Hayes. Initiatives like this require discretion. The higher you rise, the more careful you have to be about the company you keep and the decisions you make. Do you understand? Angela met his gaze, her expression unflinching. Yes, sir, I understand. As Angela left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that Whittaker was testing her. His words felt loaded like a veiled warning. When she got back to her car, she called Jonathan. I just met with Whittaker, Angela said. He's either suspicious or trying to recruit me into his operation. Jonathan cursed. This is getting dangerous. What's the plan? Angela stared at the horizon, her resolve hardening. We keep digging. And when we're ready, we hit him where it hurts. No warnings, no second chances. That night, Angela reviewed Marcus's latest findings. The web of corruption was sprawling, implicating not just Whittaker but several high-profile individuals across industries. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about siphoning money, it was about consolidating power. Angela felt the weight of the battle ahead. They were up against powerful forces that wouldn't go down without a fight. But she also knew one thing for certain: she wasn't backing down. As she prepared for the next phase of the investigation, her phone buzzed with another message from Priya. I think someone broke into my hotel room. I'm safe, but they were looking for something. Call me. Angela's blood ran cold. The enemy wasn't just watching, they were closing in. Angela called Priya immediately, her voice calm but urgent. What happened? Priya, speaking quickly, recounted the unsettling events. I stepped out for dinner, and when I came back, the door was slightly ajar. Nothing looked stolen, but my laptop had been moved. Someone was looking for the files. Angela's heart pounded. Are you still at the hotel? No, I left as soon as I realized, Priya said. I'm at a coffee shop now, but I don't know where to go. Good move leaving, Angela said. Text me your location. I'm coming to get you. Angela picked up Priya 20 minutes later, scanning the area for anything suspicious. Priya looked shaken but determined. You did the right thing calling me, Angela said as Priya got into the car. I backed up everything on an encrypted drive, Priya said. Even if they got into my laptop, they won't find what they're looking for. Angela nodded. That's smart. But we can't take any chances. You'll stay with me tonight. Back at Angela's apartment, Priya set up her laptop on the kitchen table while Angela checked the locks on the doors and windows. What now? Priya asked. Angela sat across from her, her expression serious. Now we go on the offensive. They're getting desperate, which means we're getting close. But we need to bring in someone who can protect you and the evidence. Priya looked hesitant. Do you think we're in danger? Angela met her gaze. I know we are, but we're not backing down. The next day, Angela called Jonathan and Marcus for an urgent meeting at her apartment. They arrived within the hour, Marcus carrying a backpack full of equipment. I heard what happened, Marcus said, setting up his laptop on the kitchen table. Let's secure everything. Jonathan leaned against the counter, his expression grim. This is escalating fast. Whoever broke into Priya's room knows we're onto them. Angela nodded, which is why we're going to escalate faster. Marcus, can you set up a secure connection to transfer all the files to an independent server? Already on it, Marcus replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Jonathan crossed his arms. And what about Whittaker? Do we confront him or wait until we've got everything lined up? Angela thought for a moment. We wait. If we move too soon, he'll cover his tracks. But we need to send a message that we're not afraid. That evening, Marcus finished transferring the files to a secure server. We're good, he said. Even if they come after us, they won't be able to erase this. Angela nodded. Good work. Now we need to focus on building our case. Jonathan, can you reach out to anyone in your network who might have insight into Whittaker's connections? I'll start making calls, Jonathan said. And Marcus, Angela continued, keep digging. There's more to this, and I want to know everything. What about me? Priya asked. Angela smiled faintly. You've done enough for now. Stay here and stay safe. Let us handle the rest. The next day, Jonathan called with a breakthrough. I've got a source, he said. Someone who used to work with Whittaker on these so-called initiatives. They're willing to talk, but only in person. Angela raised an eyebrow. Do you trust them? Enough to hear them out, Jonathan replied. They've got a lot to lose if they go public, so they're cautious. But they've hinted that Whittaker's network extends into defense contracts and political campaigns. Angela's jaw tightened. Set up the meeting. I'll be there. That evening, Angela and Jonathan met the source, a middle-aged man named Charles. in a discreet diner outside the city. Charles looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room as he spoke. "Whittaker's operation is bigger than you think," Charles said in a low voice. "He's been funneling money from programs like Pathways to Progress into black-budget projects. Some of it goes to contractors, but a lot of it disappears." Angela frowned. "Disappears where?" Charles hesitated. "I don't know for sure. But there are rumors. Offshore accounts, private investments, maybe even personal slush funds for politicians." Jonathan leaned forward. "Why haven't you gone to the authorities?" Charles shook his head. "You don't understand. Whittaker's network reaches everywhere. People who've tried to expose him end up ruined or worse. I'm only talking to you because I believe this needs to end." Angela's mind raced. "Do you have any hard evidence?" Charles pulled a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. "Copies of emails, financial records, and memos. It's not everything, but it's enough to prove Whittaker's involvement." Angela opened the folder, her eyes scanning the contents. It was damning. "Thank you," Angela said. "This will help." Charles nodded but looked uneasy. "Be careful. If Whittaker finds out you have this, he'll come for you." As Angela and Jonathan left the diner, Angela's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "We've got a problem. Praya's gone." Angela froze. She immediately called Marcus. "What do you mean she's gone?" Angela demanded. "She stepped out to get some air," Marcus said. "I went to check on her and she wasn't there. Her phone's off." Angela's stomach dropped. Praya was the heart of their investigation, and now she was missing. Jonathan put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find her." Angela's jaw tightened. "We have to. Whoever took her knows she's the key to everything." As they raced back to Angela's apartment, one thing was clear. The enemy had made their move, and the fight was about to get personal. Angela drove back to her apartment, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Jonathan sat in the passenger seat, phone in hand, making calls to anyone who might have a lead on Praya. "Praya wouldn't just vanish," Angela said, her voice taut. "Whoever took her knew exactly what they were doing. They've been watching us, waiting for the right moment." Jonathan nodded, his brow furrowed. "She's strong. If she left any trace, we'll find it." When they arrived, Marcus was pacing the apartment, his face pale. "I looked everywhere," Marcus said. "Her bag's still here, and her laptop's untouched. She said she was stepping outside for fresh air, and she never came back." Angela scanned the room, her eyes narrowing on the window. She walked over and inspected it, finding no signs of forced entry. Whoever had taken Praya had done it cleanly and efficiently. "We need to act fast," Angela said. "Marcus, pull up any nearby surveillance footage. Jonathan, check with your contacts, see if anyone's heard anything unusual." "What about you?" Jonathan asked. Angela's jaw tightened. "I'm going to find her." Marcus quickly tapped into public surveillance feeds from nearby cameras. After several tense minutes, he found a grainy clip of Praya walking out of the apartment building. A dark SUV pulled up alongside her. "There," Marcus said, pointing at the screen. The footage showed Praya speaking to someone through the SUV's passenger window. Seconds later, the door opened and she got in. "License plate?" Angela asked, leaning in. Marcus enhanced the video, zooming in on the plate. "Got it. I'll run it through the database." Within minutes, Marcus had a hit. The SUV is registered to a shell company, one of Whittaker's known fronts. Angela's blood ran cold. They've got her. Angela grabbed her phone and called Evelyn, filling her in on the situation. "This is serious," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "If Whittaker's people have Praya, they'll do whatever it takes to get her to talk, or worse." "They won't get the chance," Angela said. "We're bringing her back." "How?" Evelyn asked. Angela's tone hardened. "By hitting them where they least expect it." Angela, Jonathan, and Marcus worked through the night, piecing together Praya's likely location based on the SUV's movements. Marcus traced the vehicle to an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of the city. a property linked to another of Whittaker's shell companies. It's heavily guarded, Marcus said, showing the live footage from a hacked security camera. Armed men at every entrance. Angela studied the layout. We don't need to take them all out. We just need to get in and get Priya. Jonathan frowned. This is dangerous, Angela. If Whittaker's involved, his people won't hesitate to use force. Angela's expression was resolute. I've faced worse. Are you in or not? Jonathan sighed. I'm in. They geared up, Marcus providing a small arsenal of non-lethal tools, stun guns, smoke grenades, and tactical flashlights. Angela led the charge, her military training kicking into high gear. As they approached the warehouse under cover of darkness, Angela outlined the plan. Marcus, you'll create a distraction at the north entrance. Jonathan and I will enter from the east side. Once we're in, we'll split up to find Priya. Keep communication open and stay sharp. Marcus nodded. Got it. Angela turned to Jonathan. Stick close and follow my lead. Always, Jonathan said, his voice steady. Marcus triggered the distraction, setting off a series of loud bangs and flickering lights near the north entrance. Guards scrambled to investigate, leaving the east side lightly defended. Angela and Jonathan slipped inside, their movements precise and silent. The warehouse was vast, filled with crates and machinery. Check the offices, Angela whispered. Jonathan nodded and veered off while Angela moved deeper into the building. Angela found Priya in a small, locked room toward the back of the warehouse. She was sitting in a chair, her hands tied, but she looked unharmed. Priya, Angela whispered, kneeling beside her. Priya's eyes widened in relief. Angela. They. No time, Angela said, cutting the ropes. Can you walk? Priya nodded, standing shakily. I think so. Angela helped her to the door, her senses on high alert. Meanwhile, Jonathan encountered two guards patrolling a hallway. He acted quickly, using a stun gun to incapacitate them without drawing attention. He moved toward the back of the building, where he knew Angela would be. Angela, I've got movement near the west exit, Jonathan said through his earpiece. Understood. We're heading your way, Angela replied. Just as Angela and Priya reached the hallway, another guard appeared, his weapon drawn. Angela reacted instantly, disarming him with a swift move and knocking him unconscious. Let's go, Angela said, pulling Priya along. They met up with Jonathan near the west exit, where Marcus was waiting in the getaway car. Get in, Marcus shouted. They piled into the car as more guards began to swarm the area. Marcus floored the gas, speeding away as bullets ricocheted off the vehicle. Back at a safe house, Angela debriefed Priya, who explained what had happened. They wanted the files, Priya said, her voice trembling. They kept asking where I stored them. When I wouldn't answer, they said they'd find them anyway. Angela nodded. You did well, Priya. You didn't give them anything. But what now? Priya asked. Angela's expression hardened. Now we take this to the Inspector General. Whittaker's network ends here. As the team regrouped, Angela couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. Whittaker would retaliate, and when he did, they needed to be ready. For now they had Priya safe, the evidence intact, and a plan to bring the truth to light. But the enemy wasn't just fighting to protect themselves, they were fighting to maintain control. And Angela knew they wouldn't go down without a final, desperate fight. Angela stood in the middle of the safe house, her mind racing. Priya was safer now, but Whittaker's network wouldn't stop hunting for them. Time was running out, and Angela knew they had to act decisively to dismantle the operation before Whittaker could regroup. We take the evidence to the Inspector General first thing tomorrow, Angela said, addressing the team. We've got enough to expose Whittaker and his entire network. Jonathan nodded. Do we have a direct line to someone we trust there? Angela met his gaze. I do. Rear Admiral Stevens. He's old school, incorruptible. If anyone will take this seriously, it's him. Priya, still shaken but determined, spoke up. What if Whittaker gets to him first? He has connections everywhere. Angela's jaw tightened. That's why we move fast. We don't give him the chance. The next morning, Angela and Jonathan drove to the Pentagon with Priya and Marcus staying behind at the safe house to monitor any activity from Whitaker's network. Angela carried a secure briefcase containing the USB drive, Charles's documents, and a detailed timeline of the corruption they had uncovered. When they arrived, Rear Admiral Stevens greeted them in his office, his expression unreadable. Angela saluted, then got straight to the point. "Sir, we've uncovered a serious corruption network involving Rear Admiral Whitaker," Angela said, placing the briefcase on his desk. Stevens raised an eyebrow. "Whitaker, are you certain?" Angela opened the briefcase and handed him the files. "These documents prove it. He's been funneling funds from public-private initiatives into offshore accounts, using shell corporations to hide the trail." Stevens reviewed the files in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked up at Angela. "This is damning," Stevens said. "If this gets out, it'll be a scandal of unprecedented scale. But you're right. It has to be addressed." Angela nodded. "What's the next step?" Stevens leaned back in his chair. "I'll convene a confidential meeting with the Inspector General's office and the Secretary of the Navy. We'll launch an internal investigation immediately." Jonathan frowned. "Do you think Whitaker knows we're onto him?" Stevens's lips pressed into a thin line. "If he does it now, he will soon." As Angela and Jonathan left the Pentagon, Angela's phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. "You need to get back to the safe house," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "Someone's trying to breach our systems." Angela's stomach sank. "Are you holding them off?" "For now," Marcus replied. "But they're good, real good. They're targeting the files we uploaded to the secure server." "On our way," Angela said, hanging up. When they returned to the safe house, Marcus was furiously typing at his laptop, sweat beading on his forehead. Priya stood behind him, her face pale. "They've been trying to erase everything," Marcus said, not looking up. "But I've set up redundancies. Even if they get through, they won't find the original files." "Good," Angela said. "We need to assume this is Whitaker's doing. He knows we have enough to take him down." Priya looked at Angela. "What if they come after us again? They already took me once." Angela placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's not going to happen. We're staying ahead of them." Jonathan spoke up. "Stevens is launching the investigation. Whitaker's going to feel the heat. He'll get desperate." Angela nodded. "That's exactly what we need. Desperate people make mistakes." Late that night, as the team regrouped, Angela received a call from Rear Admiral Stevens. "Hayes," Stevens said, his voice grim. "We've got a problem. Whitaker's lawyers are already pushing back, claiming the documents were fabricated. He's denying everything." Angela exhaled sharply. "We expected this. Does the Inspector General believe him?" "Not entirely," Stevens said. "But they're demanding more concrete evidence before they act. If we can't deliver, this could stall." Angela's mind raced. "We have witnesses. Charles and Priya can testify." "Testimonies help," Stevens said. "But we need something irrefutable, something that ties Whitaker directly to the money." Angela hung up and turned to Marcus. "We need the smoking gun. Can you access the offshore accounts?" Marcus hesitated. "It's risky, but I'll try. Give me a few hours." As Marcus worked, Angela and Jonathan discussed their next steps. "If Marcus can get into those accounts, it's over for Whitaker," Jonathan said. Angela nodded. "But if he fails, Whitaker will bury us." Just before dawn, Marcus let out a triumphant yell. "I got it." Angela and Jonathan rushed to his side as he pulled up a spreadsheet showing the offshore transactions. The records detailed payments, withdrawals, and deposits, all traced back to Whitaker. "This is it," Angela said, her voice steady. "This is what we need." Angela immediately contacted Stevens, who arranged an emergency meeting with the Inspector General and the Secretary of the Navy. The evidence was undeniable. Whittaker was suspended pending a formal investigation, and law enforcement began moving to freeze his accounts. News of Whittaker's corruption broke the next day, sending shockwaves through the military and political circles. Angela watched the coverage with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "You did it," Priya said, sitting beside her. "No," Angela said. "We did it." As the dust began to settle, Angela knew the fight wasn't over. Exposing Whittaker was just the beginning. There would be more battles ahead, more systems to challenge, and more people to protect. But for now, they had won, and that was enough. Angela looked out the window, the sunrise casting a warm glow across the horizon. The world felt a little lighter, a little more just, and she was ready for whatever came next.